Hello everybody, welcome back to Hidden Harvest with Liz. Today we're going to be doing our what if. And today we're going to be taking something a little bit more spicy and a little bit more topical to certain areas of the world. For those of you who do not know about these particular things, they might be news to you and you might feel the need to go out and research what it is I'm talking about. And I encourage you to do so. Whether you hear something on mainstream media or you hear it from a podcaster or something like that, I recommend that you take a few times. Actually, every time. Anytime you hear news from any podcaster, YouTuber, mainstream media, anything, I definitely recommend you going out and doing the research on your own to find out if there is another side to what it is that you have heard, or if there's something that they are specifically leaving out, and maybe even analyze why this particular amount of information has been left of what you were told. Aside from that, we are going to be discussing the what if civil unrest. And I know it's kind of jumping off of the deep end, and there are people on X right now that are calling civil war. And I won't necessarily say civil war because the first step to civil war would be starting with civil unrest, and you have to ask yourself exactly what the definition of civil unrest is. Let me do a quick Google search. Civil unrest is generally understood to include violent and non-violent groups acting such as riots, protests, isolated and sporadic acts of violence. That's a pretty vague terminology, but usually it is a predecessor to a lot of things. Typically, some forms of civil unrest might include protests, which is what it says, which some of you might remember the Summer of Love riots when everything was going on back then. That would be considered civil unrest. The things that are going on now in Texas in the USA, for those of you who do not know about what's going on in Texas, there's a bit of kerfuffle going on with how certain administrations are handling certain things, and certain states that are extremely concerned about how things are being handled and have opted to handle things themselves, which I think is how it's supposed to be. But aside from that, you could consider that civil unrest. The things that are going on overseas with the farmers and everything else like that, protesting the climate activism that is actually shutting down farmers being able to do their job, there are those kinds of things. And the odd thing is during one of my streams, for those of you who do not know, I am a gamer, and I game over on More to Me for Life. You guys can check me out over there. But during one of my streams over on Twitch, which it's by the same name, same games, the whole 9 yards, I was talking about the civil unrest and stuff like that, and I was talking to a few people who are overseas, not necessarily in that area, but I was asking them what their opinion of it was, and in their country, or at least for the most part, they hadn't even heard that it was going on. So I don't know if it is not being covered by their mainstream media at all, or how it is being handled by certain countries, but there are several countries over there that are protesting the World Economic Forum's interference in how their government handles certain things, and some of the measures that are being imposed on the people who live there to follow this sort of guideline on how they're supposed to run their country. I won't get specifically into that because that is a whole new what if, and it's more of a, I won't say conspiracy talk, because their plan for the world, their plan for governments, their plan, all of that stuff, their plans are listed on their website. You can easily go read their website and see what it is that they're planning to do and how they plan on doing it. Now, whether or not you agree with their plan and how they're planning on doing it, there is disagreements on how much those plans are, first off, helpful, and how much those plans are interfering with the way in which things are working now. And whether or not their effort is even needed, like this climate change thing, whether or not they are, well, panic porn, basically. If it's another form of, let me have your money so I can govern you. I won't get further into that. I think by my tone, you can probably guess how I feel about it, but I'm not going to include all of how I feel about it, just that this is a thing, and if you want to, you can go check out the World Economic Forum's website to see the things that they intend to do and what they want certain governments to do. Because there are people who do not agree with the way things are being handled, it may call for people acting up, people protesting, which is supposed to be a normal part of the world. You're supposed to be allowed to peacefully protest. The problem is it becomes civil unrest when it's no longer peaceful. And that's where the change is. Once the protest has become unpeaceful, then you would call that civil unrest. let's discuss what we think civil unrest would look like. Just because in order to prepare for something, you kind of have to brainstorm what it would feel like, what it would be like, the things that might happen, and the things that you might encounter during a civil unrest situation. For instance, during the Summer of Love riots, I won't get into discussions about why they started, how they started, the inciting incidences, or whatever, but during those riots, there were certain sections of certain cities that were cut off, and bands of people basically took over blocks of cities. If you wanted to go in and out, you had to answer to whoever was in control of that particular block at that particular time. And it wasn't the government, and it wasn't the police that were in charge of it. It was civilians who had taken it upon themselves to take over sections of the city. So, in that particular instance, you have to ask yourself, do you have the ability to convince this armada of people of letting you back to, say, your business, to your house, to your family, that type of thing? In the case of, let's see, if you're going through riots, say the particular road that you're going on is a road that goes between your house and your work. Well, obviously, just because there's a riot going on doesn't mean your boss is going to forgive you and say, no, you don't have to come in. Definitely stay home. Whatever. That's not going to happen. They're still going to want you to come into work. So you have to drive through this area where rioting is happening, which is a terrifying prospect about having to drive a vehicle through a riot area, especially since some rioters might be armed. Some rioters, I have seen rioters tipping vehicles over and setting them on fire. This stuff is terrifying to contemplate. So that's one instance of something. In the case of stuff that is going on over in Europe, I think it's countries like Germany. I'll try and find the actual posts and put them on here along with it so that more of the countries that are actually involved can be in there, because their struggle right now is very, very serious, and I hope that people know about it. So if you don't know about it, I would definitely recommend going and finding the information, because their struggle is very real right now, and they're being very vocal. I'm not going to say whether or not all of their methods are the best methods in the world. I'm not here to judge them. I'm here to say there is a bit of civil unrest going on, and what does that look like for the normal, everyday person who is in that area? What are they having to deal with? One of the instances being, these are farmers that are protesting certain things being implemented, which means instead of the farmers being on their farm, they're protesting. They're protesting massively. And what does that look like for the normal person who is going around living their everyday to-day life and trying to go back and forth to work and trying to feed their children? It looks something like this. No food in the store because the farmers aren't in the stores working. Now, we can put a tinfoil hat on and say that maybe because we've done our research and we know what certain organizations are actually after, that maybe this is by design. And I'm not going to say one way or the other on whether or not I think that it is by design. It could be, maybe, what-ifing. It possibly is by design to make sure that there isn't ready food for the normal everyday person. Now, the issue is after the civil unrest reaches a peak, say the farmers have gotten to the point where they're making some notice, but because they've been off their farm so long, things have gone untended. The relationships that they had with other groups, being farmers markets, the places where they ship things like that breaking down, there's going to be repercussions that might last for a long time, which means even after the protests end, and they're not even close to ending because no resolution has even started, how long will it be before the people, the everyday working person who's not in the protest, is just trying to survive, how long is it going to be before they have food on the shelves again? Now, I'm not saying this to make anybody feel bad for having protested. The things that they are doing, they feel like they need to do for the survival of themselves and their families, so I can't say that it's not needed. But for the everyday person, what does it look like? No food. No food on the shelves. How do you feed your family? So that's 3 different situations. Now let's cover a 4th situation, the stuff that is going on in Texas, right near the border. I wouldn't say that that's fully civil unrest. And the reason why I say that is, as far as we know, currently there has been no violence. And that's good. As long as it doesn't turn into that, it will not be considered civil unrest. It might be considered civil disobedience at the most. In that case, what could that possibly look like to certain folks? Well, right now, at current, this is the news. Now, whenever this stuff was first starting up, we were getting news by the hour things were changing. And since this stuff has started happening, the news has been coming in slower. So far, from what I can tell, for the normal everyday person who is in Texas right now, they're probably not feeling very much. As a matter of fact, I've talked to a few people during streams about what is going on, and they say it's tense, but nothing has happened yet. And that's kind of the feeling that I get from a lot of people whenever they're talking about it. It's like, there's tension, but nothing's happened. Everybody's just kind of on edge. So I would say that's probably the thing that you're going to get during the civil unrest part of it, is people holding their breath, the tension being high. And that in itself causes issues. With the tension being high, things might become more unstable because people aren't feeling secure. They don't know what's going to happen next. They don't know how to prepare for it. They're not sure how bad it might get. And those types of things are definitely going to be going through their heads. So that is another factor of it. Not only are you having to worry about your food situation whenever it comes to the farmers, not only are you having to worry about possibly driving through a very violent area that you don't know whether or not you're going to be able to get through, and possibly having some sort of harm come to yourself or your family if they're in the vehicle. And then you also have the one where people were taking over blocks, which is crazy. In that circumstance, you have to ask yourself, okay, well, getting to my house, getting to my job, getting to my other family, am I going to be safe? What's going on? And then you've got the tension that happens right beforehand, the actual build up of tension. And because people are building up on tension, you know just as well as I do, when people are tense, when things are uneasy, people act out and act differently. So it doesn't take very much to set things off. So now that we've completely thought through the what if, what can we do as our one thing to try and counterbalance this particular situation? And I would have to say, for me personally, because I didn't include it with my basics, because in a lot of cases, some people do or don't feel one way or the other about it, I would say my first concern would be self-defense. For some folks, that might look like a hole puncher. For other folks, it might be mace. Other folks might be tasers. Other folks, it might be brushing up on their martial arts skill or taking self-defense classes or something similar to that. So that would be my one thing. And if I was going to expand, it would basically be find out what you're comfortable with, what you're capable of using, should you be called to use that self-defense thing, you would actually have to be able to think on your feet. And that is another thing. I don't necessarily want to do more than one thing on my what ifs. I'd prefer to keep it as one thing. I would say if your area is beginning to get to the point of civil unrest, the worst thing you could possibly do for yourself, the one name one thing to make things better, the opposite of that would be going around and being half-cocked in your preparation. And by that, I mean, like, if you're drugged, if you're drunk, during a high-risk, high-stress situation, being impaired in any way is only going to be a detriment to you, your family, and the other people who are around you. Because if you're not operating on all cylinders, you might make a decision that you will regret. Make sure that if you're going to pick up the security aspect, even if it's not a hole puncher, it's Krav Maga or something like that. I don't know a whole lot of names for martial arts, but if you're doing martial arts, but you're inebriated or you're hopped up on some sort of drugs or something like that, don't expect the cops or the court or anything like that to take you seriously that it was self-defense because you are impaired, is what I was getting at. Let's drop it there, because I don't want to get dug too deep into that one. That's not what this is about. As far as the research would kind of be off of what I was talking about. Whatever method you plan for security for you and your family, make sure you have done the research for that type. Like, if you're planning on using a hole puncher, make sure that you actually take classes and are certified to use and authorized in your country, not your country, your state, your whatever, you're authorized to carry one. And some places are open carry, some places have got concealed carries, and some places they have no laws at all, and some places they have laws where you can't carry at all. So make sure you know what you can have in your area. Aside from that, if you are taking self-defense courses, make sure you sign up for your self-defense courses and take your course and practice your stuff. If you are doing things like self-defense for women, make sure that you also have backup and stuff like that. I won't go deep into that one because some of these topics can be flagged as not appropriate topics to be having, even though those kind of topics probably need to be happening more often than not, but I won't get that far into it just yet. Will this help in life? I would say yes, because there doesn't have to be civil unrest in order for bad things to happen. Sometimes bad things just happen, and you being able to defend yourself could mean the difference between you're being attacked and someone calling the cops, and it's already too late by the time the cops get there. Cops are usually like 20 minutes out on a good day, and by then you or your family are seriously injured, in which case it was already too late. I am wary about having conversations about defending yourself or weaponry in which to defend yourself, because it's a very divided topic in a lot of countries, including our country. But you should always have a way of defending yourself and your family. Plain and simple. And in the cases of civil unrest, when things could go topsy-turvy really, really bad, I would say it's very, very important. Is this going to happen in the civil unrest that is going on over with the food situation? Probably not. But theirs isn't quite as civil unrest. There's more civil disobedience. I expect there to be civil unrest in the fact that people are not getting food. And typically when people go hungry, that's when people start acting out. So that's a bit of a worry there. Tinfoil hat rating. I would say 4 out of 5. The likelihood that somebody will experience civil unrest at some point during their life is pretty high, and I would not have said that before the COVID era, during the Summer of Love. All of this stuff lately, because of the tensions going on around the world, I say the likelihood that you will run into civil unrest or you run into some random act of violence in your lifetime is a pretty high scenario, which is sad, but truth. And therefore, having a way in which to defend yourself is always a good idea either way. As far as my opinion on the whole civil unrest thing, I don't want to give opinions. We're going to what if opinions. Let's just go with what if in situations certain things are being done, certain measures are being implemented that greatly impact you and your family in some way. And you have chosen that instead of paying attention because it's too much. It's just too much. Keeping up with the news, too much. Keeping up with everything that's going on in the world, too much. There is a certain point when the things that are happening out there are happening with so much regularity that it will eventually impact you, and you not knowing now does not protect you later on. So for that instance, I would say if you are an individual who is currently watching a whole lot of mainstream media, perhaps it's time to step outside of the mainstream media box, because there's a lot of people who are getting fed false information. I'm not saying everybody, and I'm not saying everybody that you can find who is not mainstream is telling you the truth either. What I'm saying is now would be the best time in the world to use the internet, which is at all of our fingertips, to do some research. And not necessarily stick your head in the sand anymore, because things are happening and things are amping up. And it's time to really start paying attention. Because I'm sorry to say, not knowing is no longer an option. You can stick your head in the sand, but the repercussions of the things that are going on now in the world will touch you whether you want it to or not. So it's time to get prepared, and it's time to know, and it's time to be ready. It's time to get your pantry in order. It's time to work on your garden. It's time to learn some new skills. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you next time, and we're going to try out yet another what if to see if we can be more prepared for these possible scenarios sometime in the future. I will see you then. You have a wonderful day, and wonderful night, and you stay shiny. Bye!